What's up everyone, my name is Jasmine Quinones. I'm a filmmaker here in Austin, Texas, and I'm gonna show you how to get an easy color grade in 3 steps. It might be a little bit more than 3 steps, but like, it's easy, I promise, I promise. Don't worry, I got you, I got you. So for this example, I'm gonna actually be using DaVinci Resolve. However, I do want you guys to focus more on the techniques of what I'm using to color grade versus the fact that I'm doing it in DaVinci Resolve. If you wanna switch to DaVinci Resolve, I highly, highly recommend it because it's 20 million times better than any other software for color grading. However, if you are using Final Cut Pro or if you are using Adobe Premiere, you can still follow along with these techniques that I'm going to be teaching today. Let's get started. So right now I've got a clip that I shot while I was doing a commercial for New Balance, and this was actually for a production company called Magic Box, so this is not directly my client. However, this is footage that I did shoot on my own. Now what we have is just a flat log image. This image in particular was taken on the Sony a7S III. I know a lot of you guys out there are Sony users, so I hope that you'll find this helpful in color grading your Sony a7S III footage. All right, so first things first, what I like to do in DaVinci Resolve is create 3 nodes. So 3 nodes are essentially the same as saying that you have 3 layers. I know that in Final Cut Pro and in Adobe Premiere, a lot of people use adjustment layers to color grade. If I remember correctly, it's been a minute since I used either program, but these kind of work similar to adjustment layers. They just move this way instead of being stacked on top of each other. So what I usually do is on the second layer, yes, we're gonna start on the second layer, is we are going to find a Rec 709 conversion LUT. So this is a very, very important step when you're color grading log footage. You need to convert your log footage to a Rec 709 color space first, like before you do anything. So a lot of camera companies have their own folders that you can download online of Rec 709 conversion LUTs. You can find them all over the internet. So most softwares actually come with a lot of Rec 709 conversion LUTs themselves. DaVinci Resolve, for example, has a really large folder of already previously downloaded Rec 709 LUTs in here. With that being said, the first assumption to be made would be, okay, well, let me find a Sony S-Log3 to Rec 709 conversion LUT. I have a few here. I believe this is yep, right here. We have a very specific flavor of Sony S-Log3 to Rec 709 footage, and you can see what that's doing to our image so far. It's just adding a little bit of that contrast and saturation. It's compressing it into a Rec 709 format for us. However, I don't really like the way that it converts. It feels very yellow. It doesn't feel like it's giving me a nice base to start at. So what I've found is that I often will go use different conversion LUTs that aren't meant for Sony cameras. Sometimes I'll use Fuji Rec 709 conversion LUTs. Sometimes I'll use Ari Alexa conversion LUTs. I would say play around until you find a really good Rec 709 conversion LUT that brings your image to a really, really good starting base. So the one that I'm gonna be using today is actually called Ace's Gamut AP1 to Rec 709. That feels to me like we have our image at a very good starting point. Nothing looks too yellow, nothing looks too washed out, nothing looks too green. I like this LUT. Now we can kind of start the more fun stuff. And again, I did this on the second node, the second layer. The reason why I did this is because I found that if you do the Rec 709 conversion and then you make a layer on top of that and you start to try to mess with the exposure, the saturation, the shadows, it doesn't yield the same results, which is why I've started putting the Rec 709 on the second layer and then going back to the first layer to do my exposure tools. So we're gonna label this in order to stay really clean and organized. So this is our Rec 709, boom. And we're gonna go to our first node, and this is where we're gonna start to play around with our exposure, our saturation, our contrast, just the basic tools. So I'm gonna pull up my parades down here, just so I can kind of see what's going on with white balance and all that. So as you can see, we're at a pretty good starting point. The white balance looks pretty on point. Nothing is, you know, nothing is underexposed. So I don't have to do too much to this as it is. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add slight more contrast to this image. Just like that. And I'm also going to punch a little bit more saturation in there. I'm gonna probably leave it at 58. I think that's looking pretty good. If you wanted, you could go start to mess with the temperature or the tint in this node. I think what I'm gonna do with this image is I'm gonna introduce a little bit more warmth just to have that nice kind of like the sun is behind him, get a little bit more warmth in there. I'm gonna leave the warmth at 100 for this. So here we are, we've added a little bit of contrast, we've added saturation, and we've added warmth. That's literally it. I can show you the difference. So that's just the Rec. 709. That is with contrast, saturation, and warmth. That's all I did. Honestly, this looks freaking great as it is. So if you wanted to just leave it at that bare bone minimum, then this is a pretty nice looking image, I will say already. I'll show you the flat, completely flat. This is log. And then I'll show you our very, very basic color grade. And I'm gonna label this. I like to label this one our exposure. Actually, no. I'll name this basic tweaks. I don't know. You could probably name it something better than basic tweaks, but now we're gonna move on to our last node. So this is why I was saying that it was 3 steps, 3 chunks. Your first chunk is gonna be converting to Rec. 709. Your second chunk, which actually comes before it, but your second chunk is then gonna be basic tweaking of exposure, saturation, all that jazz, just basic stuff. No real creative stuff is going into this node. And then your last node is gonna be where we really dive into more of our creative looks. Given that this is a sports commercial, what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to introduce a little bit more of that kind of like that gritty fitness vibe into it. And honestly, the way that I'm gonna do that is pretty basic. I'm just going to add a slight greenish teal tint to the shadows. So I'm just gonna go down to my color wheels. So we've got my color wheels down here. This is again something that you can find in Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere. This is not anything new. Our lift is gonna be our shadows. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to just introduce a teensy tiny bit of greenish teal into the shadows. So you can see what that did automatically. And I only pulled it like very slightly. Like you don't need to be doing all this, you know? A lot of people feel the need to like pull this a lot. You only need to pull your shadows just slightly. And I will show you what it's looking like now, the before and after. So we're just gonna turn that off. So as you can see, the look that we had before was a lot more magenta-y, a lot more warm in the shadows. And now we just introduce a little bit of that greenish teal vibe to kind of give it more of that fitnessy, running through the city, urban type of feel. Now, as you can see, when we did introduce that green, it affected his skin tone a little bit. So we want to try to counteract that. So what I usually do for that is also pretty simple. I just go to the gamma wheel, which is your midtones, and I just push that a little bit more magenta, just to kind of get rid of a little bit of that green tint that his skin had. Push that slightly more magenta. And I'm liking that. I think his skin tone looks pretty neutral. I like it. I'll show you again the difference. I love it. It's looking dope. Okay, so at this point, I would consider us having completed the 3 steps that I was talking about. We did our Rec. 709, we did our basic tweaks, and then on the last layer, we did our creative looks, which literally was just pulling the shadows a little bit more towards the greenish teal and pushing our midtones a little bit more towards the magenta, just to make sure that his skin tone stayed a little bit more neutral like it's supposed to look. I'm just gonna label this, I'm gonna label this guy creative. Now, if you wanted to take it a couple steps further, I do have a couple things that you could do. This would break our 3-step rule. This is adding a little bit more steps. However, what I'm gonna do to make this image pop a little bit more is I'm just gonna add one more node, and I'm gonna call this node, what am I gonna call this node? I'm just gonna call this node, you know, a little spice. I probably should label them something that actually makes sense, but for my purpose right now, I'm just gonna call this node a little spice. What we're gonna do in our a little spice node is we're going to go over to the curves, and what we're gonna do is we're going to take our black point and we're just gonna move it ever so slightly just to give those blacks a little bit more of a punch to them. And then I'm gonna take the whites and I'm also gonna very ever so slightly raise the whites just to give it a little bit more of a punch. Not too much of a difference, but it adds a little bit more punch to those blacks, which I think looks pretty cool, in my opinion. Again, we're getting into the realm of color grading is a tiny bit subjective, so I would say at this point, start to use your eyeballs, you know? You gotta train your eyes. You gotta really, really train your eyes. All right, cool. So now that we got a little bit more pop in those blacks and those whites, what I'm going to add to this node is a special little effect that a friend of mine told me about, and it's called the glow effect. This effect, I'm not really too sure if they have this in Premiere and in Final Cut, so this might be something that only exists in Resolve. I don't really know. But regardless, I'm gonna take this glow effect, I'm gonna throw it on there, and what you can see that it's doing is it's taking our shiny highlight parts of the region, which is all of the sky that's behind him, and it's making it glow. As you can tell, this is way, way extra, and I need to dial this back. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to push the shine threshold a little bit up so we don't get as much of it. I'm gonna turn the brightness of the shine down just ever so slightly. I'm gonna keep the spread where it is. I think everything else I'm gonna keep it where it is as well. And I'll just show you the difference. So the glow just added a nice kind of soft highlight bloom behind him. I personally like the way that it looks. It doesn't always work in every shot, but there are certain shots where if you apply this effect, you can really, really get kind of like a cool, bloomy highlight effect, which, you know, is kind of reminiscent of if you used a Promise filter. But I like what it does. I like how you can kind of see the light is kind of like wrapping around him a little bit more. I like it a lot. I would say for me right now, this is the final look. It's not too crazy. It's kind of a basic look, not too much going on. You could go back to any of these nodes, and if you wanted to make a little bit more adjustments, you know, if you were like, oh, I want to see more green or more blue in the shadow, like you could push it there, you know, you could push it a little bit more. If you wanted to go back and like make it a little bit warmer, like you could push it there. I actually like that a lot. I'm gonna make it a little bit warmer. I pushed my warmth all the way up to 220 now. I like that. All right, so this is our complete and final look, and this is the regular log footage. I hope you guys learned something. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Get out there, go color grade your footage, and don't be afraid to use log. Just don't. It's not that scary, I promise you. You can even use these techniques on footage that is not log. Just remember that. Just remember that, fam. Cut the tape. Roll it back. Roll it back, roll it back. We done. We over. We done.